I'm good. I'll have it in front of me too, so it's just so I kind of know what you guys are looking at. So, anyways, you can see I titled this "Saved from Darkness, Serving Through Faith as Israel," and I'll explain a little bit more why I chose to call it that. Um, so, I'll just pray. Yeshua, thank you for this time again. We can be in your Torah today. May you continue to help us learn more about who you are and how to be able to walk in your ways, and even who you called us to be. And Father, even when you gave your instructions to your people that everyone, Jew and Gentile, were all part of Israel. So Father, may we see this a little bit more in your scriptures today. In Yeshua's name, amen. So, even as we're seeing what's going on, we see how Israel's coming back. Now, some of you may agree with it, some of you may not. Either way, they're going back because Elohim said, I will bring you back. Then when I bring you all back, I will be able to finish fulfilling what I said would happen. So everything that he says has to happen. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this today, exactly according to what he said. If it doesn't happen that way, more needs to happen before before he's able to finish what he said. So, because we know that there's, I understand that we don't agree. There's a lot of things even that Israel does, that happens in Israel that I don't agree with, but that's in every part of the world. We can't be like, oh, you're worse than us because you should know better. Yeah, they should know better. But even we don't have an excuse either, because a lot of, especially the Western nations, were founded on Christianity, and Christianity says that it doesn't believe in certain things. Then why are a lot of these things happening in our Christian, some people would still call us Christian countries, right? Well, why is that still happening? So, it's Parasha 54 we're on today, and I mean, also I'm going to help us hopefully understand a little more today why this is even relevant to us. Because a lot of us see, the whole Passover event, or Pesach, as many of us call it, as a bit, well, why is that important to me? And so today's parasha is about how we would be rescued from the domain of darkness. So why do you say, you notice I said we, okay, why do you say us? Why do you say we? It was not our forefathers, unless some of you are here who are Jewish, I don't know. Then if you are, then yes, your physical forefathers way back would have been there. But for myself, as I know, I have no relationship to any Jew who ever lived before. So who lived in Egypt, and we are not Jews. Most of us here, again, are not Jews, as far as I know. Okay, you can, if you are, tell me later. It'd be great to find more about that. Why should I then think of myself as being rescued, right, from Egypt? These are all good questions, and hopefully we can better understand for our personal growth in our faith and walking out our belief. I know a lot of this is talked about during the actual Passover meal. Those of you who join, some of this won't be that new to you, but it's be my first time kind of talking about it a little bit more, at least for you guys. I have talked about it before. I've done other at home doing Passover, and other times doing Passover as well. So we must look at the fact that the killing of the firstborn was so thorough, that it included not just the rich, the poor, it even included all of the animals. Right? Why God did you have to be so So make sure that not just the people, not just the rich ones, not just like Pharaoh and the leaders who maybe we think deserve to have their firstborn killed. Why was it everyone? Why was it the one in the dungeon? Why was it some guy that Egypt happened to take over their country? Why did they have to lose their firstborn too? Why did the animals have to be included in the firstborn? What did they do? What did the animals do? They're not people. They're just created to do what God created them to do. And these are good questions, and I hope you guys can also do your own research later on if you choose to on this. So so those of you who have studied would have noticed who have studied this before would notice clearly that there are texts that that say he hardened the heart of Pharaoh. Well, you can go to the questions there. Thank you, Eunice. Thank you. So we know that there's actually quite a few texts, not just this one that we read today, that we would have talked about also before, but other texts where Elohim is referring to this event that happened way back in Israel's history. He says that he did it. He actually says he did it. He says, I didn't send a messenger, I did it. Okay, so what did you do? Did you kill? Did you save? Did you really do both? Why? Who are you? How are you justified? Right? We would want to ask that, and I'll go through the scripture that actually talks about that. It talks about that in Romans. I'll get there shortly. So while we also see Pharaoh hardening his own heart, because you have to understand that at the beginning, even when Adam and Hava, from the very beginning, when God created them, as I've stated before, he gave them, like he gives us, he gave them choice. I prefer to say he gave them their own choice. I've talked about, if you want to hear what I said about why I prefer not to use the word free will, that's in a previous one. You can listen to that on this for the L'chaim if you want to. So, because again, shortly I'll just say that we are allowed to choose, but we have two options. We're not like the Creator. He had the choice to create us or not create us. Okay, because of course we know what happened. The adversary comes in, deceives them, but they still had a choice to listen to the deceiver. If we know he gets the curse, they're not cursed. He's cursed. The land is cursed. But Adam and Hava are not cursed. Yes, things are tougher for them now because man has to work harder for the fruit of his labors. She's going to go through more pain when she gives birth. Versus the adversary that was said, now you're going to eat dust. And so here we see at the beginning clearly they had the option, do I listen or do I not? So they chose to listen to the deceiver. So it also must be mentioned that we have no reason to question the one who created of all of mankind for his glory and to do his will. Romans chapter 9 talks about this, so if you want, you can turn with me there. As Romans chapter 9 clearly seems, those of you who have done a short study at all or even heard people talk about it, possibly, I haven't done a thorough study. I've memorized the chapter. So from what I learned from my memorizing of, it seems like this chapter he spends a lot of time on kind of dealing somewhat with this question, this problem. And it is a problem for most of us humans. We don't like this idea that I can both save and destroy at the same time. And It's natural for us not to want to, to have a problem with that, because clearly at the beginning, that's not how Adam and Hava were created, right? They were created to eat from the fruits, or created to eat what God gave them. And then the deceiver comes in, and then, eventually we get to Abel and Cain. Cain kills Abel, all right? So we have this kind of, but at the same time, we also know the very beginning of Genesis 3:15, where God says that one would come from the woman. So this is, it's not, the details are specific, but we know it's going to come from a woman, and he is going to crush the head. But at the same time, that's the reason he's going to do that, is so we humans can now be saved again. So weird, kind of this death brings life to us. But at the same time, as we see what's happening today, and I've had discussions with people about this, people have a hard time understanding, again, with Israel, even believers having a hard time understanding that Israel has the right to go out and take out these terrorists. I know their fathers. I know their sons. I know it's someone's child. But you have to realize that, like at the beginning, what they're taught, if you look at what they're taught, even those terrorists who are still alive, who've been allowed back, they're going to do it again. They've already said. That's their goal. The goal is not to stop. The goal isn't good enough that Israel decided, okay, we'll give you peace by giving you the land. Okay, the goal is to kill them. So Israel has to save its people and them by going first. We were remembering this before we started the service. Remembrance Day. If they didn't go and defend themselves first, maybe a lot of us wouldn't even be here today, because he would have killed a lot more than stopping at one people group or two people groups. He would have gone after anybody he didn't like. Okay? He wouldn't have stopped till he felt that he had done what he felt he needed to do. After the Jews were done, there was another group. Okay, so the allies, they're like, no, you're not going to do that. So what do? They go to war against the military. And so they have to kill that military. Sorry, that's just the reality. Because they're going to kill you if you don't kill them first. I know it's not natural for us, and it shouldn't be. It's weird for us to have to deal with that, but we're in a fallen world. So Romans 9 talks about how God, and I'm going to be spending a little bit of time especially focusing part of this on verse 17. So I'm turning there now. Verse 17 says, for the scripture says to Pharaoh, for this very purpose I raised you up to demonstrate my power in you, so my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. Now I'm reading from the Tree of Life version. Yours might be a little bit different, but I'm suspecting that generally it's going to be the same. So what does he mean? Why is he raising him up? Did he just do it, or was he also allowing Pharaoh to at the same time make his own decisions? And I think we'll hopefully get a little more understanding on how I at least see it based on my understanding and my reading of Scripture. So we know that Elohim had already shown Abraham. Now, I'm also going to talk about chapter 15 of Genesis will be part of this as well, where Abraham is shown that his progeny, his children, would eventually be brought into this land. And then that God would go in and actually bring them out. Because if you remember, after Elohim asked him to bring all of the sacrifices, that he gets them ready, he gets the birds ready, he kills the bird, but he doesn't break it. The other animals we know he separates. Now, first, when he's finished, it's nighttime and these birds are coming and he scares them off. But then, later on, we don't know how long exactly, but later on, he falls asleep. And all of a sudden, he sees this vision of this. And some has a furnace and like a smoking furnace and a firing pot going through. And he's sleeping. Okay, he's not awake in any way. So I believe that he's actually seeing Hashem, he's seeing himself, Elohim, as, I would say, I'm just going to put this out there, but as based on what I understand, Yeshua always shows up as the physical representation. Anyways, he believes that this angel of Adonai walks through as the furnace, and there's a furnace and a smoking pot, a smoking furnace and a fiery pot. Now we know, I'll talk a little bit about it, is that when they traveled through the wilderness, we notice that during the day, there's this cloud, okay? So, and I do believe that because back then they were very good at orally, through memory, passing things down to the next generation. And you can be sure that, Abraham to Isaac, Jacob passed it to his children, what Abraham was told and through Isaac. So now those children are passing it to their children. Now, some of them might have also written it down. Doesn't say that, but that's not really part of this discussion, just mentioning that they might have. But we know that orally they would have been passing things down so that their generation would know what their God, the God of Israel, the creator of the world, did for them, so that they would remember in this, okay, the same way when we pass things on, so that we don't forget, okay? So they pass it on, and this also should help us to understand, as some may want not to admit, though the text is clear that Adonai himself, and again, as I said earlier, both does the killing and the saving. We should also be reminded in our text of Scripture, when the Pesach is talked about, Elohim says, "It is I myself who did it, and not another." It should also be noted that Yeshua, now, I'm just going to make a quick mention here of Revelation, okay, because we do know that in Revelation, the Father, Elohim, says that he is going to give the keys of death and Hades to his Son. So, as John talks about in Revelation, and so I believe personally that Abraham had no problem believing that it was Adonai himself who would do the killing and the saving, okay, because he was the one who also walked through. Now, that means then that he's the one, to me, I would have seen it if I'm Abraham as, okay, whatever's going to happen in the future, he's the one who's going to do it, not somebody else. Okay, now, to help explain that a little bit more, because we know that Yeshua and the Father do work together at times. And even, I'll mention quickly, if you remember the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, it says the angel of Adonai calls to the Father, to Elohim, calls up. And when he does it, then that's when the fire and brimstone. So they work together. Yeshua doesn't always just do it all. Sometimes he calls to the Father intervenes and does his part. All right? So, and I believe that is a little bit of what's going on here in our Pesach story. But at the same time, though we can't fully explain it, both Yeshua is at the same time Elohim, because there are times when this one who's not Elohim acts as if he is God. So how can one who's acting, who's not God himself, say that he is God? Especially those of you who have studied the Akedah, where all of a sudden this one says that, okay, God had already told Abraham, kill your son. Then all of a sudden later, God says, okay, I've seen that you're going to kill your son. Don't do it. Well, who are you? I was just told not too long ago I'm supposed to kill my son. Who are you to overturn the command of God? God told me to do it. I don't know if I should listen to. No, Abraham clearly had this idea that the one speaking to him somehow, does the text explain it? No, somehow is equal to God himself. So he doesn't have to question whether he should stop killing Isaac or not. He just, the sword is ready to go in, and then he stops. He sees the ram caught, he brings it. It's the same here. I believe that Abraham, because of that, also would have some ways have seen this idea that God can be not only the one saving, but also the one who brings death, and that's okay. All right. So, and at the end of the vision, God tells Abraham that he would give the land that Abraham is dwelling into his progeny. So again, this idea that literally God himself is going to make sure that it happens. Now, how he does that, how Yeshua and him are, how he's, all of that interplay, we're not going to be able to fully explain it. Maybe one day when we get to be with him for eternity, we'll have a better idea of how, to understand it. Because, right, we can only understand so much in our finite minds. We have to sometimes, okay, God, I don't get it, but I'm going to trust what you say regardless, whether I can understand it fully. And I probably can't understand it fully for some of you today, but I'm doing the best I can with what I've studied. So therefore, if we can see through the eyes of faith of Abraham, we're able to get a deeper understanding into how Elohim would himself bring Israel out of Egypt. All right, so, and not because all of Israel would believe as their father Abraham. And we know that's true, right? We know, unfortunately, because as we go on studying more and more, we'll see that it's not too long, and after they get out of Egypt, they're already complaining. Even before that, they're already setting up the golden calf. God just saved you. How can you be so quick to celebrate setting up another god like the Egyptians did? But, I mean, we sometimes do the same thing. Maybe not so exactly like they do, but we have something else that sometimes, whether we realize it or not, we may put in his place, okay? So we have to try and understand, okay, what if I'm in that situation, right? It would be tempting when your leader's been up on the mountain for 40 days, probably 40 nights, and he's not there, and you're used to seeing him. God, what happened to him? Maybe we should set up another God. Let's set up another God. Oh, good suggestion. Okay, this God will bring us out of Egypt now. Okay, I mean, yeah. It's not right, I know, but it'll help us to better understand maybe what they were going through. So, and because not all of Israel would believe as their father Abraham did, it was absolutely necessary that Adonai destroy all of Egypt, as he did to bring them all out. Otherwise, they would have found out all sorts of excuses to stay and not listen to Moses and end up dying in Egypt. All right? Some of them would have listened, been like, yeah, good idea, a few of us will go. But more of them, like today we see it, right? Coming up with all these reasons, even though things are getting really bad in all the countries in the world, okay? If those of you are following it, even you see it's getting worse and worse out there for them. So why aren't more of them leaving it? It's the same. It was the same back then. If God didn't completely do what he did, you can be sure some of them probably a lot more of them would have stayed. Because, okay, well, I have to die, but at least I don't have to go deal with the wilderness. What am I going to eat? Oh, I have cattle. Okay, how long are the cattle going to last? What about water? All these things, right? They have minds. They think like we do. So those would be questions they would have asked for themselves, but they couldn't. And why? I'll go through that a little bit too. It could be argued that Elohim, if he didn't do this, was not able to carry out what he said. For for what he said he would for the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph too. Why do I say Joseph? Specifically mention Joseph here because roughly 430 years later, we'll talk about this. The text just says 430 years. It doesn't explain very well how they came up, why God chose. Okay, 430 years, Moses. That's what you're supposed to write down, right? But Joseph had predicted that Elohim one day would come, the God of Israel would come and bring them out of Egypt. He even said, when he comes, make sure you take my bones with you. All right? So that's why I mentioned they were again reminded, not that long ago, relatively speaking, compared to like Jacob and Isaac and Abraham, that one day Elohim would bring them out of Egypt. And Joseph, who actually also brought them into Egypt because they had to go to see him because he was the one giving the food, right, during the famine. So it should also be seen that even, let's talk about this a little bit now. So is hardening the heart of Pharaoh. Pharaoh at the same time continues to harden his own heart to the point, and you notice that when they're at the Red Sea, which we'll talk about that later, not today, that's another time. He would rather chooses to bring his troops there. He dies, they all die. Every single one that's there with him dies. Now clearly there's, boys and younger men left home who would, have children, so Egypt didn't completely get destroyed at that point. Right, because there would have been families with more than one son. That son maybe wasn't old enough to go to war, so he stays home. Next thing you know, as time goes by, he gets married, has children, so on. But those who did go, there's none of them left. They're just washed up on the shore. The horses, the chariots, everything destroyed. So, but Pharaoh still chose because God knew that he would. God also knew that he was going to do this to show Israel what kind of power that he has over the enemies, and so that they can know for sure. So when they turn on him, they really had no excuse. It wasn't like God was like kind of, well, I hope you believe. No, he made sure at this point that all of Pharaoh and all of the military of his were destroyed. And they saw that. They experienced it because they were like freaking out, like, uh-oh, we got this wall of water on one side of us and the military of Egypt's coming. They're going to destroy all the men and take the women and children. So and then Moses, God tells Moses, listen, do what I tell you, stop complaining, and see me save them. So he saves them again. He saves them completely again. There was no, Moses again, they would have seen Moses up there holding the staff. It wasn't, and so yes, they would have rightfully given him a lot more respect. Okay, anybody who's there doing that, we would give them the kind of respect that they deserve. But at the same time, they would have also known that it was their God that made it happen. And same with the killing of, and every single plague that happened before this. Their God, the God of the Egyptians, could do nothing. He couldn't stop it. The best he could do was copy it, and that was only the first few. After that, even the Egyptian charmers and the sorcerers, they realized they couldn't even match what was going on. So they realized that there was the God of Israel that was doing this. They even told Pharaoh, let them go. They're going to completely destroy us if you don't. Of course, Pharaoh, right, didn't want to listen because he's I'm stronger than the God of Israel. I'm going to show the God of Israel. He's nothing compared to me. Okay. So again, he's still making his choices while the God of Israel is still destroying his gods that he worshiped and eventually would take his own son. So the next question then we'll deal with today is, in this story, is how then could the Israel, and I'll finish a little more back to, like I said, Romans 17, go back to that again later at the end. But the next problem then that arises out of our Pesach event is, how could the Israelites be justified in asking for the goods of the Egyptians when they had no intention to return them? We already know that God had said that when you get ready to go, when you're done, listen, and you're out. You don't have time to do this, you don't have time to do that, you don't have time to let the bread rise. Eat your food when your meal's over, and I tell Moses, you leave. Hey, so, but it does say clearly that in the text that God would give them favor, the Israelites favor with the Egyptians, and that is exactly what he did. He gave them favor. No, that's what the text says, but also I believe too that part of that would have also, there would have been rich people who lost a son, who would have been telling those who didn't have as much, give them what you have, give them what you have. We got to get them out. You might be dead tomorrow too. You might lose your son tomorrow. You might lose, your second or third son, or no, not your son tomorrow, but another son or whatever, right? So, and the other way, those who didn't have as much would have been telling the rich ones who had more, who might have been more stubborn, give them what they're asking, because it says that they were afraid for their very lives. They were afraid that if they didn't go, that's it. He's going to destroy us all. There's going to be not a single Egyptian left, because our God can't stop their God. So I think, here's the money, here's whatever you need. I'm going to give it to you. I care about my life. I don't want to die. So, as well as they also, some of them probably because they maybe had been dealing with having to actually be the slave masters, not giving them what they deserved, and some of that, they probably, some of them maybe felt some remorse for treating them that way. So let's give them this so they'll leave, because they actually deserve it. We mistreated them for this many years, even though it was Pharaoh's decision. They felt sad, so okay, let's give them that they actually deserve it for how they worked for us, and we were giving them nothing. All we were doing was making it harder on them. So that would have also been going through their minds. But as far as the text itself says, it only says that he would give them favor and that they feared for their lives. All right? So, but I'm trying to, even those of us here today, I believe that some of these, we got to think, what else were they thinking, okay? Because they weren't all thinking the exact same thing. People see things differently. So, okay. And because of this, they also had, and it talks about this, they also had great respect for Moses. That's the other reason why they said, yeah, you do what Moses says here, let's give them so they can leave. They had great respect for him because they saw that when he would speak, it would happen. When their God would tell Moses, you go and do this, whether it was a plague that was coming upon them or whether it was the plague was stopping, when Moses said it, it happened. So again, they would have had some deal of kind of this, well, Moses is a great man. I don't really want to mess with him either anymore. So respected him. And so they would have now come to realize that this was the only hope that they had left of survival. Now, as far as the 430 years is concerned, again, if those of you who have read Josephus, he does actually talk about, one idea is that because Abraham spent 215 years and then they're saying roughly in Egypt, and then another 215 years. That's how he would calculate why, all right, the 430 years is there, how you can come up to that. But we just have to trust that what God said on that, because he does say 430 years in the text. So he says that, and it says that exact night too. It doesn't say 430 years, and it says 430 years at that night, Elohim brought them out of Egypt. Now, interesting, there was, let's spend a little bit of time on this. There was this, and I should mention too that sometimes I know it's easier if I've had discussions with people who have a hard time accepting the idea that Elohim would actually do that to people, that he, and one part, save and kill. And I get that, but at the same time, it's kind of convenient for us to just then find a ways to kind of rationalize, well, no, it wasn't really God. It wasn't, he always uses something, so we try and believe we need to protect God, Elohim, like he can't protect himself. No, that doesn't, you can't, he's the one who decides, okay? Really, in the end, he's the one who decides. And so he, as we know, looking at the scriptures, is more than capable, even today, of protecting himself. We don't need to worry about defending. We need to understand our scriptures so others will understand who he is. But in the end, with some of these things, we need to trust him and just be, okay, God, you did it, you said it. I don't understand it, but I'm going to trust you anyways. Because otherwise, it's convenient more for us to sometimes rationalize it away because we don't know really how to explain it well. And we have a hard time accepting that fact. And again, it's normal because even in the beginning, Elohim, when the Father created, he didn't intend for anybody to kill anybody. His intent was that all of humankind, from Adam and Hava, would be obedient to him. That's why he created us. He wanted us to be around with him, to have relationship with him for eternity. But he knew that Cain, but he knew that people would, if given another option, some of them would choose the other way. He knew that. But thankfully, all right, even today as we're going through this, I hope you're also it's reminding you of what Yeshua did for us, and even our own salvation. So when Elohim brought them out at that night, the question is, why would they have left with them? Well, I think I kind of answered that. The mixed multitude would have left for different reasons with them. But they would have left mostly because of these different reasons. They saw the power of the creator of the universe, the God of Israel. That's really ultimately why they would have gone with the Israelites. Because they know, if we go with the Israelites, okay, we're also going to be in the wilderness. We don't know for how long, but we're going to be traveling through the wilderness with them. All right? So, so maybe that's also why they were a little more willing to part with some of their things, because even some of the mixed multitude would have been with them, and right? So they would have eventually used everything that they brought with them. So interesting though, it says the mixed multitude were to be circumcised. Now, again, circumcision. Now, why all of a sudden do they have circumcised here? Now, if you study later on, back then I believe that this is not how they thought when it first happened. But the rabbis eventually, it became, as I talked about before, I'll make it short, that you had to be circumcised to be saved. But they, like people are good at doing, okay, Christians to all of us. Some of us are trying to get better at not doing it, but Christians, other people groups are good at changing what the text says to suit them. So clearly, the rabbis and the Pharisees are also very good at it. That's where they got it from. It's like the Christians came up with first. No, it was already happening. They just did it in a different way. Okay, so after, it was basically after, my study of history shows that after the whole Maccabees, when they revolt against the king of Greece at the time, Epiphanes, they call him Epimanes, that Ptolemy, this is a great name, that then what they would do was they would actually, if you wanted to fight alongside them, they forced you to be circumcised. Now, not all Jews, not all Jews at that time would have been circumcised as well. Okay, but they were already a Jew. But what happened was they would actually, if you read this, it talks about they would forcibly go and they would say, okay, if you want to fight with us, you have to be circumcised. Eventually what they did was, now because of that, you can understand why, was that they now made it, because you were circumcised, it now had something to becoming part of, you're now part of Israel. Now because we who are Israel, I'm talking about physically here, are part of Israel, are Israel, are now righteous before God. So now, if you want to be righteous before God, and you're a man, what are you going to do? Well, I believe in the God of Israel. They would use that against the man to be like, okay, now you have to be circumcised so being righteous towards God. That's when this happened. So it wasn't already going on. The idea maybe came up before the time of the Maccabees, but it really, you can see how the events that happened would have led up to this whole new way of looking at circumcision and salvation as one, when it wasn't that way. Because here it doesn't say that you have to be circumcised now to become part of Israel. It says you have to be circumcised so that you can take the Pesach meal. So it's now showing that you are set apart, okay? It has nothing to do, because Israel clearly already accepted them. Otherwise, you can be sure somebody, there would have been, people complaining about this mixed multitude. But the Israelites didn't complain at all. They just wanted to get out, too. Right? Because they were also maybe somewhat afraid of Pharaoh. But mostly they knew they had to get out because the God of Israel told them to. That's why they got out. So this mixed multitude is like, look at that. I'm leaving with you. So they have to be circumcised. Now we know that the Egyptians practiced, if you read history as well, their own type of circumcision. So it wasn't that, but they did it for different reasons. And there's some that say they did it before you got married, those sorts of things. So it wasn't like in today and back then where when you're 8 days, right, the baby is circumcised. Okay, so they had to be circumcised according to how the God of Israel, the God who told Abraham how he was circumcised, they had to be circumcised the same way. So it was like some of them, went through a second circumcision. Especially the adults who weren't the firstborn, they would have had to. They might have been circumcised. They probably were circumcised a second time because they couldn't partake of the meal if they weren't, even though they were still accepted. So the other thing, it does not say that they are now saved because of their circumcision. And I already talked about the rabbis, so I'll just keep going here. Rather, I believe they were already accepted as part of Israel before being circumcised. So there's no quarrel from any Israelite as to whether they should circumcise them or not. Otherwise, you would think that when God's, well, why, there might be questions like, why do they? So they would have, again, believed that because their great-grandfather Abraham was circumcised, their father Abraham was circumcised, then yes, those of the mixed multitude should also be circumcised as well. I don't think they would have had a real issue with that, because they had to be circumcised, so it's not really fair that that mixed multitude, they should be circumcised like we are too. But at the same time, also, if you remember the story, when Moses he gets married, goes to the land of Midian, gets married, finds Zipporah, they have 2 children. The eldest, on their way back, Elohim, it's kind of hard to say for sure, but it's interesting. Elohim says he's going to kill their firstborn, Gershon. Yeah. Why was he going to kill him? Because Gershon wasn't circumcised. What's the big deal? Because the problem is, if his sons, especially the firstborn, isn't circumcised, it would give people the question, should he really be leading me, if I'm an Israelite, out of Egypt? Because he clearly has a son that's not circumcised, right? The question is validity as a leader. So God says, many years before this, not many, but some time before they finally leave Egypt, that but I think he's more going after Moses, because it's interesting. It's the wife, Zipporah, when she realizes what's going on, she immediately she doesn't want to lose her son, so she says to Moses, "You're a blood husband to me." And so they continue together. The family's intact, all right? But basically, this way, Elohim kept any of the Israelites questioning his validity. Why, Elohim, did you choose him because of his children not being circumcised? They couldn't do that. So, and also because for this would have been, I talked about that, this statement that they could partake of the meal after being circumcised would have also made it clear that there was to be one instruction, teaching, which means Torah, for all who were part of Israel. They would have seen that, okay, you're joining us, you have to be circumcised too. So therefore, that instruction also applies to those who are not born from Abraham. And also, I'll just mention quickly too, again, I think I did last time I talked, was that Abraham believed and then he was circumcised. So again, there was this idea that the belief, I believe that Israel really didn't, at that time, didn't have a huge problem with the idea that you believed and then you were obedient. I believe that was something that eventually, later on, seems to have become an issue. But I also know that part of that is because of the history where the Jews and the Christians separated from each other. And so, of course, the Christians would use that against them to create more of a separation. Well, we don't want to be like them, so we don't want to do that. That's for them, that's not for us. Although they often say that, well, we believe in the God of the Bible. And I'm not dismissing that. I'm just saying that if you look at your history, you can see why a parting of the ways happened and why this would be And then the Jews saying about them, well, why don't circumcise your children, not part of us anyways. Okay, so it goes both ways. So the next two texts, I won't spend a little bit as much time on these, but are found in Isaiah 21:11, verses 22, verse 4, 1 Thessalonians 4, verses 13 to 18. And again there we see that God is going to do this. He's going to make sure that this happens. Now, he still uses, I'm not dismissing the fact that he uses intermediaries, all right, because we know that even God says, I'm going to send this kingdom from the north to destroy you. But interesting, God says he's going to send them to do it this time, okay? So he's still making the decision. I know in their mind, they don't believe in the God of Israel. They don't care about who he is. They don't have nothing to do with him. They don't have, anything to do with him. So they're not thinking like, okay, the God of Israel is telling us we need to go destroy Israel today. No, they're not thinking that. But he's using them. And even some people ask me questions, and I'll be like, well, he's using you whether you believe in him or not. It doesn't. He's the sovereign one. He's the one who's over all. So, you can disregard him if you want. That's fine. You don't have to believe in him. That's fine. We need to tell them why they should. But to say in the end, it's God's going to work in who they are in their spirit. If he's going to bring them. In the end, it's his decision, but they still have to eventually make that choice. And they will eventually make that choice on their own, even if they don't fully understand all of it. So, even today, as we see what's going on in Israel and the rest of the world, we see how God is working out events to coincide exactly with what the scriptures say. So it's not that the scriptures, to me, how I see it, are just the world's events are proving what the scriptures are saying. So we're getting closer to this time where 1 Thessalonians we talked about today, where we're going to be taken. And we are going to be taken into there. I don't dismiss that. The only part I don't agree with is the fact that this idea of we're going to be taken to heaven, and then some believe that, and the Jews are going to stay on the earth and suffer through this horrible tribulation and all of this stuff. No, what I believe, based on even the fact of how the Romans and the Greeks would do it when they would fight and conquer, that the history is that they would actually go, and when you would conquer people, the generals would come and all these people would come and they would be throwing money and all of this. And then, but you would have the people, other people from your country or your city where you're going back to would come out to meet you. Okay, because they would have heard, wow, our general just defeated this entire nation. I want to celebrate because, right, we're the ones who are victorious. So I believe that could be a little bit maybe what Paul was thinking, that when we meet him, because we are going to come back with him, we know that first the dead will rise, then those of us who believe will go and meet him in the air, and we'll come back to Israel with him for eternity. So that idea of kind of meeting, and then of course we know, though, we're not just coming to get the spoils of the war. Fortunately, we're actually going to join him when he does his fighting in Israel for those who believe, especially for those who believe. And so it's going to be a little bit different for us. We're going to be part of those generals, and those of us are going to be there alongside him, while watching him do what he's going to do. So I'll just read this here, what I wrote. In both cases, we see the power of Elohim over his enemies, and there's nothing they can do to stop it. This power is sent to rescue those who are his. Interesting, however, in the case of those being caught up, it is so clear that the work of Yeshua, who is the intermediary of Elohim, as Moses was in the Pesach event before. So again, what intermediary is, God's still in control, because even he says that Yeshua himself says he doesn't know, but you're God. You just made things that say like you're equal to God. How can you not know? And I believe that because if you look how in the Jews how they did things when you got married, now you had the choice of the woman you would marry, and obviously the other way. All right, they weren't just like she's it, that's it, all the time. Sometimes maybe in the poor areas, maybe it wasn't the case. There was one man and one woman. The family chose him, and the family chose her. There wasn't a second option. But what I'm saying here is that when the man would go, the son would go, the father would tell him, okay, now's the time to get your bride. So if I'm here, all right, and and I'm talking with you, and I'm looking at life in that way, I need to relate it to you in a way that's going to make sense. Because you're going to be like, okay, well, you're here, the Father's there. I can't see the Father and live, but I'm seeing you. All these kind of questions would come up in your mind. So that's why I believe that Yeshua says to them, I don't know, because he's the Son, right? So to them, they would be like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense, right? You don't know when you're going to come back and get us. You are going to come back, but you don't know when, because only the Father has that time set. He knows exactly when it comes. Now, when Yeshua gets back, now that he's back, does he know when he's coming back? Okay, he might, right? I'm not going to say he doesn't, because now he's equal again, back to where he was. But at the same time, he's still waiting for the Father to say, okay, now's the time to go back to the earth to get your bride, your pure bride. Now she's ready. So he's waiting for that answer. So again, we see this idea that Elohim and Yeshua working together, this intermediary, this one who comes and acts between Elohim and man, which is also like we were just talking about with Moses, right? We're talking about Moses here today, being the intermediary between the Father, Elohim, and man. So, so I hope it is now a little clearer that if the Israelites were not saved out of bondage, we too would also be suffering for eternity under bondage to Satan. Why? What do you mean? Well, because this was, those of you who have done Passover, Pesach would have seen that already, that this was to point us to him. For us, it has a greater meaning when we believe in Yeshua than it does for those who keep Passover and Pesach but don't believe in him. We can go, okay, well, I can see that points to him because it talks about the lamb, right? They had to kill the lamb, and Yeshua is the lamb that one day would die. And so this is mentioned in Genesis 3:15, which I mentioned earlier, that the serpent who is clearly eternal, and the serpent was created by, as you know, was created by Elohim himself. He is an angel. He is eternal already. That's why he doesn't have the opportunity, or the other angels don't have the other opportunity. They're fallen, because once they make a choice, that's it. There's no going back. And at the same time, this eternal one would come and destroy him, because only an eternal one can destroy something that's eternal. How can you have a mortal, finite being destroy something that's immortal? It doesn't make sense. It's not going to happen. Whether we can explain it, just can't happen that way. I think the best way is even we ourselves, right? If we look at how we are, okay, well, if I'm an immortal being, okay, so an immortal being needs to, okay, right? I think we can somewhat figure that out. So Abraham would have seen this with greater detail as he watches this eternal being walk through the middle of the sacrifices, saving all those who are his physically, and as a foreshadowing of those who by faith would be saved not only from bondage to sin as Israel was in bondage to Egypt, they would now be rescued to serve him in the land that he promised to them. So that includes us. Okay, you could say that the Gentiles, we can look back and go, okay, there was Gentiles walking with them to the wilderness. And one of the greatest ones talked about is Caleb, who had faith like Moses and Joshua. And Joshua and Caleb were the only two who were allowed in. The rest of the adults were all killed off. And so here they are. They're going to Egypt. They would have also, whenever God spoke, they would have also considered themselves part of Israel. I don't believe they would have ever questioned, well, you're Israel because you're from Abraham. No, they would be like, oh, I chose the God of Israel. So Abraham chose the God of Israel. We know Jews talk about him a lot. Okay, well then, I'm part of the God of Abraham. Wow, that includes me. Amazing. Now I can celebrate like them. I can be like them. I can do what God wants me to do because I'm part of them. Okay, I'm talking about those of Israel who are saved. It also includes those who are not, at least in that time. But for us, and more so, we have a greater relationship to those Jews who also believe in Yeshua, because they also believe in Yeshua. So we can relate more to them. So again, this, as I said earlier, circumcision has nothing to do with salvation. Even though if you go to Israel and you talk to rabbis, people like that, they'll try and tell you, okay, remember, if you do have conversations with other Jews, remember what your scriptures say. Be nice to them about it, but tell them the truth. And so, who are left with them through the faith they already expressed in the Elohim of Israel. This Elohim who acted completely in character by bringing them all out exactly as he had said. 12 Israel would leave Egypt. For like most of us, we are stubborn. Let's keep going here. We love to make excuses. Elohim will bring them home in like manner as he brought them out of Egypt. So as that one of that songs talked about today, we are going back to Israel one day. I can't wait to live there for eternity one day. I can't wait to have my piece of land in Israel one day because I believe in Yeshua. When Yeshua comes, he's going to fix it. He's going to make it like it was for the mixed multitude who believed, who had land in Israel too at one time. It was only later on, as the parting of the ways, and right, that things changed, unfortunately, and the rabbis started to come up with this idea. Because of pride, right, we're better than they are because God gave this to us. Unfortunately, they lost their sight. They didn't want to share it with the rest of the world. They wanted to keep it to them. Oh, this is only for us. This isn't good enough for you. You Gentiles, that's not for you. You do your own thing. We don't care. That's not what God said. God said, this is for everyone. And I think he also, if we see a little more clearly of the details of the mixed multitude, he makes that clear that they are part, that what God wanted to do, save all of humanity. And we know that part of the belief, all of Abraham who have the same faith as he did, are now part of Israel. So, but just like the mixed multitude that left with them, we too will have the grand opportunity to enlarge the mixed multitude that would have seen a Savior in the wilderness wanderings and all of the sacrifices that would have pointed to the Savior when entering the promised land. It's interesting that if you look at all the sacrifices that Abraham put out there, they were also sacrifices that would have been used in the tabernacle and the temple. So like Israel, because God chose them and because God chose to make them holy, he chose these animals to represent one day what Yeshua would do. And also just the way, not only to represent that, but more a lot of the offerings they brought were offerings of thankfulness, free will offerings, saying, thank you for saving me. Thank you for not condemning me to what I rightfully deserve because of what Adam and Hava did. Thank you, right? So I believe that even when Ezekiel talks about that, that's what we're going to be bringing, right? Because even Hebrews says that the blood of bulls and goats cannot save anyone, and it can't. It's finite, like the rest of us. How can a finite animal save us? It can't. It can't save anybody. But what they would have is the faith that that finite animal back in those days represented Yeshua. But so they were looking faith to what he would do later on versus us looking back, what he's already done for us. So they had the same faith. So with the remnant, with Yeshua for eternity living as an Israelite, and this is why I say Israel's today serving through faith as Abraham, the father of all who believe. Like I said before, those who believe in Yeshua are being Israel the way that Elohim intended Israel to be from the very beginning. He didn't intend them to leave him. He intended them, you come to me, now you teach them how to live. You teach them to Shabbat. You teach them to keep these different things. Now I know we are in the diaspora, that brings some questions, but even Elohim says to Israel that if you will do what I say, and there's no temple or tabernacle in Jerusalem today, but if they will do what he says, believing through faith in him, he will accept even the little that they do. If they're in another country like Canada and all of that, where we don't follow as much. You can go to the picture, by the way, now, Eunice. So, this is a picture that I chose, so that, of us coming out with Israel, part of Israel, I should say. So as I said in chapter 9, verse 17, which I read earlier, and I'll finish it here. I'll just finish a few more verses. So it says in chapter, starting at verse 18 now, I'll just read to verse 23. So then, he has mercy on whom he wills, and he hardens whom he wills. You will say to me then, why does he still find fault? For who has resisted his will? And it's true. But who in the world are you, O man, who talks back to God? Will what is formed say to the one who formed it, why did you make me like this? Does the potter have no right over the clay to make from the same lump one vessel for honor and another for common use? Now what if God, willing to demonstrate his wrath and to make his power known, endured with much patience vessels of wrath designed for destruction? And what if he did so to make known the riches of his glory on vessels of mercy, which he prepared beforehand for glory? So God chooses, and so that's why those of us who are here today, even the fact that we have faith is a gift from him, that he has given us the grace to be able to see who he is. So it should give us greater fervency to want to honor him as best we can in our life through Shabbat and through keeping the feasts, and remembering that even Abraham was saved before he was circumcised. Okay, any questions or comments? I think I went a bit longer today. So you can see there the torch. Go ahead, Garrett. You can see there the torch at night, and then of course we know the cloud like the smoking furnace.